Well, let's give our speaker a round of applause. They've come all the way from Portsmouth. So, Ray, come up. Wonderful to see you. Well, it's great you're here, Ray.
Thank you for having me.
And I was really inspired by your story that you shared with me the other day. In fact, I've watched the video, the record. We met on Zoom. I've watched it. Kathy's watched it once, and I've watched it about 3 or 4 times now, just to really get into your story and all that's happened in your life. So I want to sort of share that with some of you today, or Ray will. But I've wrote some things down here, Ray, and if I get this wrong, you can correct me.
Sure.
But I just wanted to write this down, and a bit about you, really, Ray.
Okay.
So this is what I wrote. Intro. There's Ray, and there's Sarah, and they have 3 children.
Sure.
Isaac, Penelope,
That's right, yep.
and Theo, who I've met.
Theo, yep.
You can just hear them at the background
The
there.
noisy ones in the corner.
Yeah. And your story's been a very interesting story in the course that your life has taken you.
That's true, yeah.
But one thing I know is that pictures can say 1,000 words. And so we've got some pictures to show you, and then maybe we'll pick up on 1 or 2 pictures afterwards. So if you guys could run that, that would be brilliant. Thank you, guys. So in a minute, I want to talk about that picture that's just disappeared, but of you as a young man.
Yeah.
Because that's an interesting story in itself.
It is.
So we'll pick that up in a moment. But let me just read some more things that you've done in your short life.
Short life.
Yeah,
Despite the
36
grey
years. And I thought, wow, you have done so much in 36 years. It's amazing. So listen to some of the things here. He's travelled to Zambia, the Philippines,
Yep.
Singapore.
Yep.
What else have I got here? You've been a missionary
Yep.
to the Philippines. You've been a pastor.
Yep.
You now run Forge Ministry School in Portsmouth for Family Church. You also have trained, and still, I suppose you could do it even now, couldn't you? You've trained in the military as an instructor for sea surviving.
Yep.
And also for firefighting in the military. Isn't that amazing? Yeah?
Yep.
And he's now also a media manager.
Yeah.
As well as working in the church and everything else you do.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's more things that I could add to that. But it's great. Really, really good. So obviously you've got Sarah.
That's right.
You've got your children. Let's see if I can remember again. Your children are Isaac, Penelope, and baby Theo.
Baby Theo, yeah, that's right.
And you've been on an adventure. But when we saw that first picture, the picture of you as a young man, I don't know how old you were in that picture, but tell us a bit about your story, particularly when you mentioned to me about what happened to you when you were 11. You grew up in Portsmouth.
Yeah.
Share a bit about your story at 11 and your dad and, yeah.
So, hello everyone, good morning. So, growing up is pretty standard, really. It was, grew up in Portsmouth. No real dramatic events really happened, other than just some of the struggles that we all might go through. I was bullied quite a lot as a child, going through school. I've got the name Ray, which is the name of a 70-year-old, thanks Mum. However, that name rhymes with other things, and kids used to like using that kind of stuff in school, and it was never really fun to go through years of that. My dad was also quite an aggressive man, and so growing up in that environment was not great. And so over a period of years, that kind of built up to a point where I became quite self-destructive at a very early age, and the age of 11 was the first time I attempted suicide. So yeah, that was kind of. I don't normally share my story, so if I get emotional, please forgive me. It's only because it doesn't really come out very often. But I don't cry because I'm sad. I cry because I know what God's done. So please just journey with me this morning, if that's all right. Thank you.
Yeah. So you mentioned to me during that time, obviously there were difficulties in your relationship, but also you were an angry young man.
Yeah.
And tell us maybe about, the rod that you had and how you used to, use
Cool.
that.
So when I reached the age of about 14 years old, I decided that I started training for my black belt in martial arts, and I went skiing. So, I went on a skiing trip and I busted my knee while skiing, and it meant that I couldn't complete my first dan training. I couldn't complete my grade. So I started boxing instead, and so that which was great because I got to hit people, but it also meant that I became increasingly unpredictable. And one of the things that my mind started to get really twisted. I started messing around with occult things and things that were quite demonic. So what I started to do was I wanted to make myself immune to pain. I didn't want to feel pain anymore, emotionally or physically. So I had a rod, and this is the rod you were mentioning, which is a big plastic rod that they use in engineering companies. The engineering companies will use this because it's so strong. They lift engines with it. And I'd beat myself all over my body with it, in my face, all over my body. So I'd wait until my parents or my mum had gone to bed, and I'd sit and I would stand in the lounge and I'd beat myself with this thing all over in order to sort of build up that tolerance for pain.
And that was what, at 14?
That was at 14.
I think, was it at 13 you had like your sort of first encounter maybe with Christianity or with God?
Yeah, my mum, we grew up in a religious church, so I couldn't really ever connect with religion. I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but I couldn't ever connect with it. I grew up in a broken home. My dad left when I was 10. I was always fighting. I was I wasn't that sort of kid that could fit in that mold. So by the time, as we grew up, my mum started having the freedom to take us to places. So we used to go to Spring Harvest every year. Some of you might be familiar with Spring Harvest, and it still runs today, which is fantastic. But when I was about 12 or 13, I remember being in a youth meeting, and that was the first time I ever encountered the love of God in that place, which I believe that point, that was one of the key points that's really saved me from going too far.
Yeah. It's just that, it didn't set you straight on the straight path straight away, but that encounter,
Yeah.
going there, put the God thing in you, didn't it?
Absolutely.
It was an awareness of God.
Yeah.
It got so bad at one time that you were telling me that others used to pay you to beat people up. Is that true?
It did. It got to a point where people were offering me money. So I wasn't like an assassin or anything like that, or a hitman. But it was getting to a point where, that was kind of the conversations people were having. They knew what I was becoming capable of, and they knew the type of mentality I had. So they were like, "Hey, I've got this guy. He's causing me issues. Can you fix that?" And I'll give you money. I'm like, no. And then it kind of dawned on me that was the type of person and the reputation I was building.
So at that point in time in your life, how would you describe what was going on inside you at that moment?
There was just constant turmoil. There was never any peace. It was just darkness. To the point where that darkness actually started to manifest itself outside of what was internal. I used to see things that weren't part of this world, and there was spiritual things that I used to see and encounter, which were very, very, very dark and truly terrifying.
There comes a point, though, in your life, and I know so much more we could talk about, but there comes a point in your life where you go to a crusade. I think it was the evangelist Tim Hall, was that right?
That's right, yeah.
Do you want to tell us about that, how you ended up there and what God did for you at that moment in time?
So I was kind of dating a girl at school, and things weren't going great. And at that same time, this is kind of my last year at school. I wasn't, I wasn't a good guy by any means to anybody. And so my dad had left. He was living with a different woman now. So he was like married. I think he was almost married again. So I think he was almost married. But there was loads of things going on at the same time. So there was like, this was happening, that was happening at school, that was happening in my relationship world. But then one of my heroes, which was my granddad, got sick with cancer. And this, sorry. This rocked my world because he was like another dad to me, and he would take me golf every Saturday, and things like that. And so this kind of messed me up because I was like, wow, what's going on? And I knew that he loved God. And so there wasn't much, I couldn't fault that. If he was this great guy in my world and he loved God, then there had to be something about that. And he passed away, and during the funeral and all that kind of stuff, I met someone, and they invited me to this conference, and that's kind of how it all kind of strung together. It was like a series of events that led to that point where I was actually being invited to come to this conference because they saw, well, we got on really well, and so they said, hey, why don't you come along to this thing? Because the conclusion to my granddad's life was, if you loved this, then I want to love it too. If you stood for whatever you stood for, whatever you believed in, I want to stand for that too. Because I recognized at that point that there was nothing good in me, but there was something good in him. And whatever it was, I wanted it.
And so what happened when you went to the conference?
Yeah, the conference was like 3 days, 3 days long. So not as quite as, but it wasn't consistently 3 days long. It wasn't like that long. But it would like every 3 evenings in a row. So we had Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night with the consecutive evenings of this conference. And so I went Thursday, and the guy, Tim Hall, he's preaching and doing all that stuff. And he asks if anyone wants to give their life to Jesus. And so I say, yeah, I give my life to Jesus. And I go down the front, he prays for me, and I hit the floor like a sack of potatoes. Literally, I hit the deck so hard. And what I didn't realize was things now started to move. All that turmoil, all that darkness, all that stuff that was in me for so long needed to come out. And it started to come out. And so this stuff started I could feel it. I can remember how it felt as well. So it started to feel like it was being pushed up into my throat, causing me to like almost growl, okay? And so this thing was coming out of me. And I remember I was gripping the chair behind me as hard as I could. And I hear this voice in my head saying, I'm not leaving you without hurting you first. And then as I hear that voice, I start getting up off the floor. And a bunch of people just kind of swarm me and start praying. And then I fall over again. And then this thing just stops. That was Thursday night. I had to go to school the next day.
How old were you at that time?
I was 15. So this was 15 years old. So I'm 15. I've got to go to school. Right. So 15, and the thing is, I know now I've got to end things with my girlfriend because that's not going well. And that wasn't a godly relationship, so that needed to stop. So I ended up ending that relationship and then go back to this conference the Friday night. Same thing happens again. And then so all this stuff's coming out and all of a sudden, but then at the end of that evening, peace. Complete peace. Never felt that before. It was amazing. And here's the cool thing. Not only did God remove what was in me, he also healed my asthma. I had had asthma my whole life. And at that point, even though I was training, I was super fit and all the rest of it, I was still using my inhalers quite a lot. And the doctors have said, if you hadn't grown out of it, you weren't going to grow out of it. And I never touched an inhaler again.
That's wonderful. Great. So there you encounter God. You're saved, as we often use that term, born again.
Yeah.
Let's jump ahead a little bit more, because you're not just Ray. You're Ray and Sarah,
Yeah, that's right.
your wife, we've seen pictures up there. Tell us a bit about how you met Sarah, but also, and we've checked with Sarah, she's okay for us to share this, the struggle maybe in the early days Sarah had when she came to Christ. So do you want to share that?
So, we, after a period of time, obviously growing up from that point in the church was really great, because that meant I had opportunities to serve God. And so, as a teenager, if you have the opportunity to serve God, do it, because it really roots and grounds a lot of that struggle that goes on in our teenage years. When I was 18, I got the chance to go to Israel, and that was just before I started my internship program with the church. And as I ended my internship program with the church, I was given the opportunity to travel to the Philippines for the first time. So I did that, and then came back. And then a month later, I was in Zambia for 3 months. And so I stayed in Zambia for 3 months and then came back. And my first Sunday back in the country was Sarah's first Sunday to church. So we kind of just crossed paths. And the funny thing is, I said to her, I think I recognize you from somewhere. And she thinks I'm hitting on her. So she's like now not interested in talking to me. Like, she's just come to church for the first time. She thinks this guy's hitting on her. I wasn't, all right? But it was just I just recognized her. And we realized later on that we went to the same school. So she was 2 years above me in school. So then she remembers she remembers me from then. So that was really interesting.
So at that point,
yeah,
you meet her in church. Sarah becomes a Christian.
Sarah becomes born again.
Yeah.
She then goes on this little bit of a journey as well, because she was quite into her clubbing and partying and all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't popular enough to do that, so she was. But she used to do a lot of that stuff, and she got born again, and then she kind of didn't really know what had happened to her. She knew something had happened. It wasn't as colourful as mine maybe, but it was significant in her own way. It was beautiful in its own way. So please don't, just real quick, if you've been saved, or if God's done something in your life, please don't compare it to somebody else, because it's beautiful for all of us. How it looks doesn't matter, because it's beautiful to you. Is that okay? I just want to get that in real quick.
Yeah,
Sarah decides to test what's going on in her heart. She didn't really know, so she went clubbing again and realized that she hated it. Like, this thing that she did for years, like she loved it. She used to do it with her friends. Now she couldn't stand it. She hated it, because God had done something in her heart and completely changed the things that she desired to do. And even, I think she mentioned this, the clothes that she used to wear, she hated wearing it. She couldn't do it anymore, to the point where she just had to say, this isn't me anymore. I can't do this.
So you married Sarah 2009?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. You've got 3 children.
Yep.
You're going on with God, both of you at that point.
Yep.
Yeah. And suddenly the Philippines comes into the picture. And I know some of your most incredible, amazing stories are in that time. But you both felt called to go.
Yeah.
Tell us, we're going to have to keep it really short, but tell us some of the interesting things that happened when you asked that call, both of you, to really go as missionaries and pastors to the Philippines.
So the first time we went, I was 19, like I mentioned, and then periodically every year we would go out on a mission trip. We started off with Zambia, and then we started off heading into the Philippines, and more and more we found that it was harder to come away. It didn't feel like we were coming home. It felt like we were leaving home, and so that desire built up more and more over years. And eventually in 2017, we put it towards all the elders and the pastors, and we said, we feel God is sending us out there, because we can't keep doing this 2 weeks of the year. What we need to do needs to be full time. And they all agreed, and so they sent us out. So we went out as missionaries in 2017 to serve the call of God out in the Philippines.
Obviously, we heard the call of God in 97 to come and start the church in Hastings.
Yeah.
We didn't go for 3 years, but for us it's really a clear call from God.
Yeah.
And like I said earlier on, it's not. Some people think if you hear from God, then it's plain sailing all the way. but it's not always like that.
No.
And we've had our struggles and difficulties and challenges. For you, obviously you heard the call, you both felt to go, and we saw some of the pictures of you in the Philippines. Maybe share a couple of things as we sort of wrap up of how God did some miraculous things, even in dark times, how God answered your prayers.
So the first 15 months of us being in the Philippines was incredibly challenging. Sarah had a miscarriage within the first 2 months of us being there. And so that's kind of how our journey started. And then we kind of headed into just full-on ministry, like all the time. And to the point where I was traveling a lot, and I was taking teams everywhere. So I would take teams. I took a team into the mountains to spend time with the natives. And like I literally were there, and I get one bar of phone signal, and I get a message from Sarah saying, we need to talk. And what I didn't realize was, while I was gone, Isaac had got bitten by about 15 times by a mosquito and had cellulitis building up in his hand, which was traveling up his arm, and Sarah had to rush him into hospital. And so there was a lot of this stuff going on behind the scenes that I didn't know about until, I couldn't do anything about it. So there's stuff going on, but in the meantime, God is moving tremendously. And we're seeing, there's photos of me preaching and stuff like that. And we've had wonderful times in God's presence where hundreds of people have encountered the presence of God and the power of God. We've seen people healed, we've seen people set free. One of the pictures actually was I was in a village, and there was this kid who had basically, someone had spiked his drink with something, and he had lost his mind, and he was chained up in his house, barking like a dog. He was possessed by this thing. And so they called me over to his house. So I brought a team over to his house, got him out, we prayed for him, and God set him free. Amen.
It's like the book of Acts. If you haven't read the book of Acts in the Bible yet, you really need to read that. It's an amazing story.
And that's what it was like. We would go here, and this would happen. We would go there, and this would happen. And then one fun story was when I was in one of the provinces, and we were traveling through these different villages and stuff. And they said, we need you to just go and evangelize, go and pray with people. And so I said, okay. But one thing you have to understand in cultural differences is that when you say pray, especially in a Catholic environment, if you say, can I pray for you? Often they won't know what that means. Because when there's so much ceremony surrounding a particular word that we use all the time, it causes confusion. So I changed my terminology. So I remember I went up to this little hut, and it was like this little Surrey store, they call it. Okay, so there's this cage, and there's this little hole in the front, and there's a woman behind the cage, and she's selling all these little knickknacks. And so I said, hey, can I pray for you? And she's like, no. And then God's like, change your terminology. So I said, okay. I said, hey, can I bless your business? And she's like, oh yeah, because they understand blessing. So then I put my hands on the building, and I began to pray. And the presence of God falls in the building. She starts feeling God all over her body. And then I put my hands through the cage, and I say, can I pray for you? And she gives me her hands, and we pray. And God gives me a word of knowledge about her back. God gives me then, just a couple of other things, and we just begin to pray. And then we move on. I come back. Her husband's waiting for me. Her husband is this big, mean-looking guy. And this guy is not in a good place. And he lets me pray for him. And God's just touching these people. And, we've just seen God do amazing things. Should I tell them about the church?
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes.
Okay. So we did all that, and then we knew that God had called us to plant a church. And so that's what we went to do. So we moved cities, and we started a church. And we knew that it was very much like you guys. It was just literally us. We turned up and we said, right, how are we going to do this? And God says, love them. So I said, okay, right, so we're going to love everybody. That's fine. So we love everybody. But love is a verb, right? It's a doing word. It means it has action. It also has power. Okay, so I remember we would pray for people, and my friend, he had a big cyst on his wrist, and he said, you know what, Ray, I don't believe. If God heals this, I'll believe. So I said, give me a hand. So he had a big cyst on his wrist. So I said, come here, give me a hand. So I prayed. And you know what happens? Absolutely nothing. But then later on that evening, he sends me 2 photos and the lump had completely gone. He picked up his daughter and the whole thing popped. Not gross, like exploded, but like it just kind of disappeared. And he said, "You're my favorite doctor." And I went, "Bro, it's not me." You said, "You know who it is." I said, and you said, if God healed this, you'd believe. So there we go. So
Amazing.
God wants to work with you.
Obviously, here today, lovely to see you all. We have people that have been Christians a long time. We've got some new Christians. We've got someone being baptised. And we've got people that maybe wouldn't class themselves as Christians at the moment. They're on a journey. And we always say, you know, coming to Christ is very often a journey. You know, and for you it was a journey.
Yeah.
Maybe in a couple of words, maybe in a sentence, what words of encouragement would you give to everybody here?
You know, God loves you. He knows everything about you. He knows the dark bits, the light bits. He knows the nice bits, the happy bits, the sad. He knows everything there is to know about you. So it means you can't hide anything from him, and yet he still chooses to love you. And he still wants you. You know, he wants you. He wants you in his family. He wants you in relationship with him. He wants you. So he doesn't just know everything about you that there is to know. He wants you. So you are incredibly valued by the person who created the universe. He chooses you. So why not say yes? Yeah. You've got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I always say this to my, I work with the, so just to clarify, I've not been in the military, I've worked with the military. Yeah, yeah. We're civilians, we're cheaper, right? So we've been contracted by the military. I've worked with the military for about 13 years. And I say to people in the military, listen, if you go your whole life choosing not to believe that there is a God, choosing not to believe that Jesus is there, getting to the end of your life and standing before God being wrong, you're going to be wrong for eternity, and that's a long time. If I go through my life believing Jesus is real and God is real and desiring and pursuing a relationship with him and get to the end of my life having lived good morals, good principles and loving my family, loving people, loving life, get to the end of my life and he's not there, I've lost nothing. I'd rather I know where I'd place my bets. How about you? Eternity is a long time to be wrong.
It is. Thank you for that, Ray. Did you enjoy that? I mean, there's so much more we could have heard.